Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Iron Radio. This is going to be a special one that we're going to set up. Phil's not on this week. He had some things to do. Mike and I were in Florida. Quick introductions. Lonnie Lowery, if you're not familiar, I am a professor of about 25 years. I'm a former competitive bodybuilder, exercise physiology and nutrition background. And we're going to be talking with Mike Nelson, doctorate in exercise physiology as well, engineer, all these kinds of great past, grip athlete. So what we're going to do is just report on a scientific meeting with cool stuff. Some of it's political, some of it's scientific, but in any case, it's going to give you an update about all things sports nutrition from the International Society of Sports Nutrition event. Enjoy. All right, welcome, listeners, to a remote episode of ironradio.org.
Live from the hotel room.
That's right. We've done it in the past, but the audio should be good here. We are just going to do a rundown, day by day, talk by talk, of what just happened at the International Society of Sports Nutrition event. There was some surprising stuff. What we're going to do is just sort of go through each talk. I'll just make a comment about it, and then I'll get Mike's response and any kind of relatively important information. The talks on day one opened with Guillermo Escalante, and one of the things that he mentioned, because he had some other people involved with this, was that creatine apparently, and I didn't know this, Mike, I think you did, creatine is illegal to buy if you're under 18 is it the whole state of New York?
Yeah, I believe New York passed the ruling on it. Rick was telling me about that, Rick Collins.
It sounds like Harvard did, there was a study there or a group, the Striped.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah.
Study that says dietary supplements are related to eating disorders. I think that's what the evidence or the scariness is. And to fight that, apparently there's this Move Nutrition Network. Is Rick Collins behind that or just involved? I know he's the lawyer for ISSN.
Yeah, I don't know if he's directly involved or not, but I know they were trying to get people together, get people educated, because unfortunately most people, if you poll them on the street, they're like, oh, creatine, that's a steroid. And it's not even remotely close to a steroid. Vitamin D and cholesterol are way more of a steroid than creatine is, but no one's freaking out over those.
Right, yeah. I think it's especially dangerous when an ignorant politician thinks that creatine is a steroid, and then, all these kids are, And ironically, later in the conference, we had some direct evidence about it could be good. Creatine for kids could be good, or even proposing studies for pregnant women.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a far cry from not letting, a 16-year-old who's in the gym take his damn creatine.
Yeah. And we have, what they say, over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on creatine now.
1,000.
So I remember Tom Inclin on one saying, he's like, well, because someone was asking him about safety of it was protein or creatine or something, and he's like, we have way more safety data on that than the ketchup that's in your refrigerator right now.
Right? High fructose corn syrup garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if people are interested, I guess you could probably just Google Move Nutrition Network. The prompt is also for researchers to try to capture even more safety data.
Yes.
As you do this, not just performance, but safety data. But again, I mean, if we have opinion-based politics, that's what makes this hard. Because if there's already 1,000 studies, how much data? I mean, I know they need data for the court cases, but it almost seems like we need political activists to try to, push reality onto some of these lawmakers because, holy God.
Yeah, and Dr. Chris Lockwood made a really good point in his talk later on, too, of if you're running a study, his 2 points, which I thought were really great, was whatever safety data you can collect, it's going to be better. Or even if you just report, no adverse effects, or, one person reported nausea or whatever it is, if you can even just have a couple lines in the study that you're already doing all the data, you're already doing all the data collection, you got all the people enrolled, that's a huge benefit because we'll have more data to back up some of these, positions and what people are looking at. And then on a separate note, testing whatever the material, if you're testing an herb to boost testosterone or whatever it is, sending it out for independent testing to make sure that what the study was done on is actually the material that you're looking at, and not just trusting the manufacturer of it, which I thought was a really good point, because you're recruiting human subjects, you're getting IRB approval, you're doing all this work. It is a little bit more of a pain to do a couple more steps to have the material analyzed, but I think it's going to go a long way to showing, this is actually what it was, and here's the analytical testing to prove that. Or if it isn't, then okay, well then we might have to rethink the outcome of the study, because what we actually looked at and what we studied isn't what we thought we studied.
Right, yeah. Years ago, I rejected a creatine paper. I don't often reject papers when I review them, but they showed no weight gain and no performance enhancement with creatine after a loading phase, and they didn't bother to even make sure that the subjects consumed it. They didn't watch them consume it.
Yeah.
They didn't say, bring back the unused portion so we can give you 92% was consumed. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's
Definitely
not testing for content, but it's like, you can't tell me, it's just not good science. Validate what's going into the people first, So, okay, just moving on, sort of the opening talk after that initial, it was almost a PSA, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There was a talk about low energy availability. I just want to say one or two things. I didn't take much notes. There were no data to speak of in the talk, but it is very common for athletes, men and women, not to eat enough. Yeah. Certainly, they go off season to on season, they start training their butts off. It's not like they automatically start eating more. There was a dietitian there talking about, and the conference was an interesting mix of dietitians and scientists.
Yeah, definitely.
Body literacy and things like that, but I didn't have much more on that. I guess listeners can just walk away thinking, yeah, I'm probably under eating. But one of the things I've always worried about that kind of stuff is you're always seeing it. We saw it later with the Masters athletes talk. People don't eat enough. It's like, but if they're weight stable, I don't know. Sometimes I think the carb guidelines are so high that we're almost like, you're not eating enough carbs. It's like, he's weight stable. And maybe the argument would be, yeah, but he's weight stable at a lower BMR. His metabolic rate is slow. It could be better. More flux through the system could be better. I get it. But did you have any thoughts about the low energy availability thing, that first one?
My only thought was, and I'm sure you would agree with this, is that equations and all that stuff for prediction, do they generally work on a population basis? Yeah, they do get you in the ballpark. But what I've noticed, especially with athletes and especially with people who are more active, is the amount of variability on an individual basis from those equations is just crazy high. So I don't really use them. I have them do a 7-day log. I have them get on the scale every day for 7 days. And I just look, is your weight going up? Is it neutral or going down? And I just take that as my starting point, because trying to estimate stuff, especially carbohydrate intake, I've found it's just incredibly variable. So I think you have to look and do an individual-based approach with each person that's coming in, and not just mass apply equations and assume you're going to be correct all the time.
Yeah. In the classroom, I talk about the Harris-Benedict equation, for example, height, weight, age, and sex. Mm-hmm. What about thyroid status or anything else that's going to drive, body comp?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. The next one was interesting, as we just shotgun this for everybody here. There was a talk on GLP-1 agonists. We've talked about them on the show, of course. Maureen Gibbons, who is a physician, but she was not just giving her perspective as a physician, which, by the way, she used to be an athletic trainer, I think she said.
Yeah, correct.
But also as a patient who used them. So, again, these are GLP-1 or GIP combo meds, semaglutide, that kind of stuff. And she gave the history of them and when things started to turn more popular, which was partly just based on, it sounded like patient compliance. Like, you could take it once a week, now everybody's all in.
Yeah.
And we've talked on the show before, the incredible irony of once moms want to do this, and not just dads, to get leaner for summer or vacation or something, now injecting stuff, it's not a PED anymore.
Yeah.
It's a physique injection with side effects, right? And so including tremendous muscle loss if you're not very active. So, yeah, that was interesting. Wegovy, Mounjaro, there's just a whole bunch. There's more coming down the pike. One thing she said was interesting was the cardiovascular benefits, anti-inflammatory. But what struck me the most, and then I'll ask you for your thoughts here, was that her personal experience was that it quieted the food noise and how transformational that was. She didn't have to fight to diet. It just happened. There was no food noise. Anyway, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I did a whole podcast with my friend Krista. We talked all about this, but to me, it's amazing. Like, if you would have came to me, 4 years ago and said, "Hey, we're going to have a new class of drugs, and they are going to be so effective that people will slash their calories to incredibly low levels." I mean, you can argue about, maybe the drugs weren't prescribed in the right dose, and you gave them a little bit too much, and etc. But the fact that happens 5 years ago, I would have said, "You're nuts. Like, appetite is so multi-redundant. We're never going to have a drug that's going to crush appetite so hard that you're going to worry about lean body mass and people losing weight too fast." And that's almost exactly where we're at right now. And she also said, like, up to 25% of what you lose is lean body mass. The one other classic study that was done in this showed up to 40%. And as listeners know, lean body mass isn't all just muscle. If you're a larger mammal, you've got, probably more bone tissue. You've got all the other supportive structures that are not fat that are considered lean body mass to help support it. But what I've noticed with just a few clients I've had who have used these medications, again, maybe the prescription wasn't necessarily dialed in correctly, their protein intake went really low, like overnight, just because their total amount of food they were consuming just dropped. So it'll be interesting to see some follow-up studies if they do a higher moderate protein with resistance training.
Yep.
How much of that can we mitigate of that lean body mass loss? Or is there some other mechanism going on there that we don't really understand yet? And I'm definitely not an expert on the mechanisms of those drugs other than the basics.
Yeah, no, me either. There was a military talk later we'll just speak about briefly with the idea that military people, because they're expected to be physically active like 5 days a week or whatever, it's going to be on the lower end of the fat-free mass loss, right? Like 25% or something. Yeah, her quote was, and this is really fascinating to me, but I had a near immediate reduction in food noise after 40 years.
Yeah, that's wild.
Of struggle. She also said, "My labs were normal, but I still needed help." Amen to that.
Yeah.
We've talked about that with testosterone, concentrations and everything else. You can have normal labs and still need help, if you're overweight, obese, whatever.
Yeah. And I think if listeners are into this, I don't think these medications are going away. I think they're going to be almost like TRT is. You can get it on almost every street corner now. And I think there'll be the dosage will probably not be dialed into where it should be. And I think trainers will be left to kind of pick up the pieces, so to speak, of not the best management of these drugs. And so making sure they're having enough protein, making sure they're getting their micronutrition, making sure they're not deficient in other micros and lifting and all this stuff. For better or worse, I think is going to fall on the heads of personal trainers in the future even more.
Yeah. Even hydration. Yeah,
hydration. That's a big thing because sometimes if the dosage is too high, like people won't even drink enough fluids, which can run into issues.
Mm-hmm. One final thought from me on this. I saw an article just recently about, on a society-wide basis, these meds are going to have a massive impact.
Oh, yeah.
What if the U.S. is not on a fatal trajectory toward 90% of us being obese anymore, right? Like the drug companies, ka-ching, right? But just the financial and the healthcare cost. I mean, if we're not going to have everybody being freaking, diabetic and having heart disease in one form or another, there's going to be huge financial impacts of this. Like, it's going to be transformative. It's more than just physique. Fascinating.
Yeah. And some of the older versions now are coming off patent. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with that. And again, counter argument is they're probably not as effective as the newer versions, which, looking at some of the research, I would agree. But it'll be interesting to see what the message is from pharmaceutical companies versus what does the data say? And if things are coming off patent, does that make it more cost effective for someone else to pick up the manufacturing cost of it and, again, increase the availability of them?
Yeah, yeah. The next talk was on Cognizin. Katie Emerson, she's a master's prepared registered dietitian. She was giving some of the background of the company behind it. They're not just health and wellness, but although they have an arm for this. Anything new out of that from you? I mean,
nothing new. They did a tap challenge game, and they did show an increase in kind of mental energy. Again, cognitive performance you can bin into all sorts of different sub areas. And for listeners, CDP colon or Cognizin is a form of choline. If you've heard of alpha GPC, that's the one that's more commonly used in sports nutrition. But I've been a big fan of CDP. We've been seeing it at conferences. We saw Renshaw present on this like years ago. There's a lot of accumulating data on it, and I think now it's becoming a little bit more accepted. If I do some formulations for companies, like people have heard of it. Where even 8 years ago, I was like, "Hey, you got to check this out," and people are like, "What?" Then they look at the price of it, and they'd usually be like, "No way." So the price has come down a lot from what it was in the past. But there's a lot of very good supportive data of it. Shout out to Dr. Sue Kleiner. There's a company called Boost. They have it in a little sachet packet that you can take without any water. They have a few other electrolytes and some other stuff in there. I've seen it show up in little like dip packets you stick in your mouth now. I think it'll be in all sorts of stuff. I know Dr. Chris Lockwood has used it in the new C4 formulations. So I think you'll start seeing it a lot more now, which is kind of nice because it does have a fair amount of supportive data on it.
It's one of the nootropics I've bought.
Yeah, I've used it for years.
Yeah, and not regretted, right? Didn't you say, I think you had a similar experience that I did, that it's not a stimulant in nature, but it seems to have a background boost to my focus kind of thing. And I don't want to sound like a commercial, but I'm trying to differentiate it from caffeine, right, or anything else like that.
Yeah, I was the first major supplement that I'm aware of that had it was, shout out to my buddy Ben Escrow at Elemental Formulations. He had it in his early version of Utopia, is this like 10 or 11 years ago now? And I'm kind of biased because I'm on their board. But he was one of the first people I saw who actually put it into a supplement that was formulated. But yeah, much more focused, not a stimulant. And if you look at things that are not in the stimulant category that increased, we'll just say mental energy, in my little air quotes here, cognitive performance, that have data, there's not a lot of them. It's a pretty short list.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, citicoline, it's a drug, right, in parts of Asia.
Yeah, Japan, I think.
Japan, yeah. Just my brief rundown, I basically just jotted down a few things. Nucleotide, it's pharmaceutical in Japan. Long-term memory support increases acetylcholine, increases phosphatidylcholine, increases phosphatidylserine, or kind of all phospholipids that you might be interested in, increases NTP, which you can think of as a form of brain energy, 250 to 500 milligrams, according to a study by McGlade in 2012, decreased cognitive errors after 28 days in women. It's one of the ones, agreed. Got some evidence. People might want to check that one out. This next one, I don't think people will probably want to check out. Testosterone and body composition. So companies are always coming along and making, the marketers making the claims. This is Leah, is it Giannine? Giving this talk, and I believe she was from Joey's lab, right?
She is, yep.
A plant ectosteroid, supposed adaptogen. We just talked about that. I'm not a big fan of that term, but some of this came out because I guess on Joe Rogan, Lieberman was saying this is as powerful as Deca, right? Or Nandrolone, right?
Huberman.
Oh, Huberman. Sorry, Huberman. It's an anabolic steroid. It's and basically no. It just didn't pan out in the research that she was doing. No change in body mass or body fat. No change in hand grip.
Yeah, 28 days, 500 milligrams. The only thing they did say is that on the Pittsburgh Sleep Score, which is a way you can qualify sleep with a little questionnaire. There was some data it may help with that. So that was the only thing that was in sort of the positive direction from that study.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of, and I did talk to him about what was the sourcing of it, and I'll have to follow up with Dr. Antonio, because he did the sourcing of that one, because people are very into testosterone, will say that it depends on the source and where you get it from and the time, and there's a lot of bunk material on the market, and so, but you can say that about anything too, and maybe there is some truth to it, but at least in this particular study, and I'll have to follow up with Joey on what the sourcing was, there wasn't really much of any difference.
No. Fishing expedition is what I'm looking at
Yeah.
here. Looking for something maybe. I mean, they weren't trying to find it necessarily, just like, does this do anything?
Yeah.
One note I'll make for nerds out there, they were doing t-tests on change scores. It's not the best way to analyze those sorts of data. There are other statistical techniques for nerds out there, two-way ANOVA, things like that I would have done, because you lose information when you just, basically say, does this percent increase, is that better than that percent increase? And I wonder why they analyze it that way. I mean, I know Joey understands that, so.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, anytime people do different statistics from just, we'll say, the old basic statistics of, is this group different than this group, I get a little weary.
Okay, this next one, probably one of the most interesting talks that I recall. David Church, The Pyramid of Anabolism. So basically, he was talking about all the different things that harm, muscle protein synthesis. Like, it's not just the dose of protein. I mean, that we get so much attention, type or dose of protein. But, sleep loss and drinking and everything else. So, you want to run down some of that?
Yeah, so Dr. David Church has been on my podcast before. Awesome guy. I always love chatting with him. So he's working in Dr. Arnie Fernald's lab, looking at different tracer methods to look at the effect of amino acids on muscle protein synthesis. And their lab does all sorts of cool stuff. But some of the things he highlighted, which I thought was great, is a super old study from George Cahill's lab. If you've ever looked at some of the research they did many years ago, you should look it up, because we probably would never do these studies again now. The one that always stands out to me is he had ketogenic diet people check their ketone levels, and I think he actually did an infusion of insulin, which, not recommended to do this, and found that they were okay because they were using ketones. Like stuff that I don't think any IRB lab would ever approve right now, but it's still fascinating that it was done on humans. And it was safe. They didn't show any issues because they had high levels of ketones. But the one thing he mentioned, which was the Cahill study, was that they had human subjects do a 90-day fast. Again, I don't think this would ever get approved again now. And what they showed was that plasma amino acid levels were stable the entire time. So your body has to keep amino acids in the blood relatively stable. They're fasting, so there's no exogenous. There's no other source of protein or amino acids coming in. So they have to come from muscle. And they did show, other studies have confirmed this, that there is a huge amount of muscle loss in very extended fast. So your body needs a certain amount of amino acids that it has to keep in the plasma. If those aren't coming in, from food, your stored form of those amino acids is going to be muscle tissue. Yeah.
Your body's going to feast on your pecs if you don't eat. Some of the numbers that I jotted down here, it looked like Lehman 2020, sleep deprivation, 25% reduction in the anabolic response to a meal. I'm going to paint with a broad brush here.
Yeah.
Wilkinson 2008, sleep restriction. So this was 5 days of just 4 hours sleep. Decreases muscle protein synthesis, although exercise seemed to rescue the response. I mean, I think all of our listeners know lifting is a big deal. You need that stimulus. But yeah, sleep loss is no bueno. Par in 2015, 12 beers. So again, not playing games here. Exercise actually did not help rescue that loss in muscle protein synthesis. Oxfelt 2023, very low calorie intakes of 50% of typical over 10 days. Women had a decrease in protein synthesis, decrease in anabolism. Essentially, he was saying, trying to emphasize, I think, Church was, that all these things, especially the resistance training, just has such a large effect compared to the things we often talk about, like, are you distributing protein properly across the day? He's like, what about the total daily dose and thinking about these control variables? So like with you, I guess when you work with clients, when the rubber hits the road, you've got to say, listen, it's not just, oh, you should sleep, honey, but you should sleep or you're going to have a 25% reduction in, anabolism, or you're under eating. What's that going to mean? You're not building muscle. Anyways, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, they did a study on military personnel. I think this was on military. I don't have the notes here. Where they did some pretty crazy stuff. I think it was sleep restriction, a lot of exercise training, and this is the correct study if I remember right. And they showed that the group that they supplemented actual testosterone in, there wasn't a huge difference in total loss, but they held on to a lot more muscle tissue. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that kind of matches, some stuff like Dr. Keith Barr has talked about, that yes, testosterone is an anabolic agent, but one of the theories is that it's a massive anti-catabolic agent, that you're really preventing a lot of loss of muscle tissue. And this study kind of confirmed that. And then one other thing was, when I talked to him later, he did a very cool study looking at 4 ounces of beef compared to, I think it was 1 and then 2 Impossible Burgers. He presented some of this data last year. We talked about it on the podcast. But what's crazy is when you put up the amount of essential amino acids in the Impossible Burger, it was pretty darn high. It was high enough, I think it was like 10 or 15 grams, where you should expect that it should be very comparable, if not even better, than the smaller amount of meat. But what he showed was it was not. And I asked him about that. I'm like, well, what the heck is going on with that? Because we've always learned that, leucine is the main amino acid that turns on that process, and you need the building blocks, so you need essential amino acids. And he said when they looked at the plasma levels in the Impossible Burger group, they didn't go up. So he said somehow in that matrix, the essential amino acids are not making it into the blood levels. And because those blood levels of amino acids didn't go up, you didn't see that increase in muscle protein synthesis. So that puts a real monkey wrench in my thing of like, oh crap. So now we can't even really necessarily look at leucine and essential amino acid levels and everything and assume they're going to be the same, because at least in this manufactured food, that turned out not to be the case, and the 4 ounces of beef was actually still better.
Yeah. I've gone on quite a bit, but like with functional foods, the food matrix matters,
Right.
And they invent this weird stuff. Yeah, not to mention, just anecdotally, we've talked about this before, Impossible Burgers, the nutrient profile doesn't look that good.
No.
It looks like you're getting, quite a bit of fat and other stuff that I really wouldn't go for unless you're a vegan just for ethical reasons.
Sure.
I can't get excited about that. The testosterone stuff did interest me. That Varanowski study 2020, testosterone over 21 days, saved net balance during low sleep and, quote, we beat them up according to some of the methodology, prevented fat-free mass loss. There was some stuff on that I think Church himself is just publishing, I guess. 15% increase in muscle anabolism, essentially, when rats got androgens early in life, like they had this memory effect.
Yeah.
It kept them anabolic, like throughout their life. Almost an argument for maybe young men could do a cycle of testosterone and benefit forevermore, it almost sounded like.
Yeah, and I think in that study, they gave to the rats or the mice when they were young, and then they didn't give them anything until the equivalent of like 30 human years. And they found that was that difference later, that they still had an upregulated response. Like almost in human years, it'd be like 30 years later, which to me that's just like fascinating. I asked him about that later at the thing. I'm like, what the heck is going on with that? And he was like, I don't know.
I mean, there are concepts like muscle memory.
Myonuclear domain,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And one other thing, too, and this has been a theme we've had on the podcast lately for mental health and other things, but I think it was DeVries 2015. I got scribbled notes here. But walking really maintains leg mass. Like, it's amazing, just do something and what that can do for just sparing muscle mass. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated. Okay. What else do we have here?
Velocitol, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, so there was an ingredient called Velocitol that seems to promote insulin action. It looks like it's chromium picolinate and chromium histidine, I believe. And they did some interesting studies with that with small amounts of protein, like 6 grams of protein. They did show a little bit better response. And then they did follow it up with another study comparing it to higher amounts of protein. I think it was 15 and 30 grams. And it did look like it might still be beneficial. Again, these are short abstract presentations. The presenters only have a limited amount of time to show you the data. But it's interesting. I don't know. I like to see further work in that area before I'm like, ooh, this is the most amazing thing ever. But might be something to keep your eyes out for. And yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I've been in the area of, that's kind of cool, but I'd like to see more data before I run out and do anything with it.
Yeah, it was one of those presentations that looked too good to be true, frankly, on a few levels.
Yeah, especially in the percent change.
Yeah, right, which is hard to interpret sometimes fairly. Yeah. Sponsored by Nutrition 2021. Yeah, Tim Ziegenfuss did a lot of the data collection, but he didn't present the slides, and I didn't understand why that was. But there's a couple of pubs here, I guess. Ziegenfuss, Journal of Exercise and Nutrition 2021. Ozdemir, I think it is. European Journal of Nutrition 2023. I had scribbled down it was chromium, amylopectin, and histidine.
Sounds right.
Patented combo? I don't know. None of those things are super exciting by themselves to me.
Yeah.
Arnie, who was presenting that, did say he suspected it was insulin-mediated. But the idea of you can layer this on top of even something like whey protein.
Right.
It's not like you're trying to correct the low digestibility or the low amino acid profile of a plant protein. That it's going to really increase all these outcomes, weight room outcomes, if you will. I'm a little skeptical right now. I'll take a look. But, there's been other attempts to enhance proteins effects, like, the BC30 and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So these additives can be neat, I guess. Maybe everybody just keep that on your radar. Velocitol. It's a patented version of what I consider some recycled nutrients from the past, but adding it in a special way to protein could be fun, I guess. Anything else there?
No. Should we go on to day 2 briefly?
Yes. You have that in front of you, and I do not.
Yeah. So they had an interesting one about fight science from Dr. Corey Peacock, which was great. Talking about different weight cuts, and they had a lot of data on it, especially around the COVID time. There was more kind of standardization across different groups, which was interesting. So I would refer people to the studies that have been published there if they're looking at what was the average weight cut, and then also weight regain. And what I thought was most interesting is it wasn't in the slides or probably even in any of the studies. He was saying that anecdotally he noticed that people and athletes who had the hardest time cutting weight also had a much harder time regaining that weight the next time, or once they could get off the scale and they were officially weighed in. And I thought that was interesting because just in the handful of people I've done stuff like that with, that matches what I've seen. If they have a really hard time making it down at weight, if we do get them there, man, I'm so worried because trying for them to regain weight, maybe it's due to stress, cortisol, who knows, is very difficult. And I've talked to Dan Garner about this too, and he's mentioned his data that it just seems like if the weight cut goes smooth, the weight regain also goes smooth. So I thought that was very interesting that he mentioned that also. We had Dr. Sanders talking about data analysis. I'm not going to bore people too much with that, but the takeaway is you can use AI to do some stats now, which is kind of wild. I just started playing with this, and I didn't do it to the extent that he did, so it was cool to see that. I was using AI to rearrange tables and to move data around, and it's pretty darn good at it. You still have to cross-check it, but he was saying using it for binning to create secondary analysis, combining large data sets. He does a lot of work with Catapult, which you get just massive amounts of data out of it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He said you can even have like ChatGPT 4.0 like do the stats analysis and create the graphs for you. And he said when he's cross-checked it, he said most of the time it's pretty much right on. So I thought that was crazy, and I just had this flashback to all the biostats and all the classes I've taken where we had to write like the raw programs in order to do it, and then we had to do that in I think SAS, and then we could use SPSS to do some stuff, and even simple things like creating a graph and trying to make it look right and changing the range of it, or you want a box and whisker plot, or what, doing that kind of stuff. You can, I don't know, probably because I'm not a stats wizard. It seems like I spend a lot of time doing that kind of stuff, where now I could literally type a prompt into AI to be like, now regraph this as a blah, blah, blah plot instead, and then poof, like you have your graph.
Yeah, I'm curious to do a lot of this. Like basically just use the right prompt because you don't want to screw it up. I'm going to go old school like he did and double check with this.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But like upload an Excel or a Statistica or an SPSS file and then say, hey, ChatGPT, run a Pearson correlation between these two columns of data in the spreadsheet, and then graph it in this style. And it just does it. Now, this makes me a little sad in that you're going to get people who don't understand statistics. They were never trained. They don't even know what am I doing? What's a Pearson R? How is that different from non-parametric correlation? Whatever it might be. And just telling ChatGPT to run a statistical analysis. What's the correlation? But it is kind of amazing, like to your point. The time savings is going to be mind-numbing.
Oh, yeah.
Once I double-check that the way I'm doing it works compared to the old way, right, which is more manual in the software itself instead of in the ChatGPT. Basically, you got to make them work together.
Yeah.
Like enter your data in your spreadsheet, run the stats, or ask ChatGPT to run it. Now make me a pretty graph, like you were saying. What's the p-value? What's the R for the correlation? Or what's the I've got two groups over 3 days. Hey, ChatGPT, run this or that stat. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So, I'm very eager to play with some of those ideas. It never really even occurred to me that I could just command ChatGPT to do that. I've had that do stuff like write an outline for this book. Like here's a book chapter. Here's the abstract. Make an outline for a 5-page paper. 8 seconds later, there it is. And that would have taken me 90 minutes at least.
Yeah.
To do this with stats now, and again, this is probably doesn't apply to a lot of you guys, but for a researcher, just commanding ChatGPT to run stats and then pretty graphs, what? Okay.
Yeah. I had also flashbacks to when I did all the early HRV data probably 14 years ago now. We didn't have anything on phones. You had to come into the lab. We had like 15 grand of used equipment in order to capture the thing, and then I had to transfer it to the raw RRs. I had to write a freaking MATLAB program to do it. I had to cross-check all the individual data and literally go through every RR by hand to make sure there's outliers and graph it and all the monkey motion that goes into it. Like now I can probably do that in a fraction of a time, and obviously there's custom programs that'll do that now too. So it's on one hand I'm like it's amazing and it's super useful. On the other hand, I get a little worried that if you haven't had to at least do some of that stuff by hand, I'm not so sure you understand the process to get it. And that's where I get a little worried. Yeah,
it's like so many things, like using AI with art. You've got to come full circle. Do it yourself, then have AI do it. Because otherwise we're going to have people spewing stats online and they don't even have the kind of the mental framework on how to go about a research design, or which stats formulae, they need and all that kind of stuff. So
Dr. Tartar did a really great talk on sleep and looking at melatonin. There's a lot of interesting things you hear online about pros and cons of melatonin. But she said the two main things that increase melatonin are the time of day, so nighttime and darkness. So melatonin isn't technically something that makes you sleepy. Some people may report that from it. There's no LD50 for melatonin. Like they've given rats like just tons and tons of melatonin.
Can't kill them.
Like you can't kill them with melatonin. However, there is no real long-term data on high melatonin use. The half-life is only 40 minutes. They were looking at some other advanced genetic stuff, the RS7359837. If people are going to go look at their 23andMe, they can look at some of that stuff. Yeah, it was great. And then the talk right after that, I think, was from somebody else, but looking at blue light blocking glasses, like, do they actually help? I think this was also from her lab. I can't remember who was the lead author on it. So they had students wear blue blocking glasses Monday through Friday. They put them on in the evening. They texted them. They make sure they were compliant. They had a sham intervention. And what was cool is they had a custom optics place create them that the lenses were still relatively clear. So you didn't obviously know if you got like the orange colored glasses or non-orange colored glasses. You knew which part of the group you were in. But what they showed was that just after the Monday through Friday of using them in the evening, they did see an increase in melatonin. And they also, what was cool is they cross-checked this by looking at cognitive processing speed, because they know that if sleep quality is improved, your cognitive processing speed is going to be better. And in the group that did wear the blue blocking glasses at night, that did see an increase in melatonin, they also did see an increase in cognitive processing speed, which was great. And I don't have an exact reference for that because I don't think that data has actually been published yet.
Yeah. I walked away from that thinking, melatonin, all good.
Yeah.
Although, a few things, I guess. One is I've been hearing some stuff for the past 2 years from some industry friends that it could interfere with glucose tolerance and carb metabolism. And I haven't looked into that much myself. I didn't ask her about it, but maybe I'll follow up on that in the future. Also, she was really kind of talking about, blue light bad at night. I get it. I mean, it's amazing to me when my wife works with some of her patients in a mental health setting, they just think it's a sleeping pill. Like, they don't understand this is to set your sleep time at night. It's a chronobiology thing. But, yeah, apparently the Gen Pop, not all of them understand. I think our listeners probably get it. Like, you reset, you take melatonin. You're not going to take that. Oh, I can't get to sleep. It's 11:30 p.m.
No.
I'm going to take my melatonin to knock me out. Bad idea. Bad idea. Yeah. The other thing was a few weeks ago, might have been a couple of months ago, actually, we were talking about how there was one study that suggested that it's not just about blocking the blue light, but it's even the intensity of the light can be a thing. So, I mean, that's just another consideration. But, yeah, you can't discuss all this with someone like Jamie when she's at the podium.
Yeah,
so.
And I just thought it was interesting that there isn't, at least that I could find, again, maybe I missed them, that something as simple as a blue light blocking glasses, which, God, I've used that on clients for like 7 or 8 years now. There's not much published data on it. The reason makes sense. If you actually are blocking blue light, we know the effects. So the outcome you would kind of expect as to what they found, but to find actual studies in humans that's a sham, controlled, randomized trial, all that nice, wonderful stuff. When I looked at least a while ago, there wasn't much data in that area. So it's cool to see someone actually looked at it and it did match what we would have expected.
It's surprising there's not a ton of data because, I mean, with companies like F.Lux or F.Lux, whatever, they, I've used that for years. Just the screen reddener so I don't have bright blue light. And then Microsoft kind of ripped that off. And I think Apple did too to some extent.
Apple did too.
So they must know that consumers are getting that idea. Yeah. That I don't want bright computer screen in my face before I go to bed. So it's obviously sinking in on a kind of a large scale.
Definitely.
So we do need data. All right, everybody. Well, we're going to call it there. There was a ton of stuff at the conference, more than we can cover in an episode. So what we'll do is you can look forward to future weeks of portions of this, clips from this being our science news section, as we are wont to do in the first half of the show, right? A little bit of science news, mid-show break, then we'll have a discussion about something muscle and strength related. So this is now going to be sort of spread across the next week or two, so you can get all the juicy stuff about what's coming down the pike. We'll see you. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.